The question we get asked the most online is about how pornography affects your brain. In fact, I pretty much know anytime I talk about the alcohol brain versus the porn brain, or our best performing post of all time is comparing cocaine and pornography. Anytime we talk about this stuff, I know we're going to get a flood of reactions and questions and responses because it is a fascinating subject. Yeah, the reason that understanding the neuroscience is so important is because when we are addicted to pornography, we engage in these behaviors that we almost can't explain. We don't understand why they're happening. And I know for me, when I was addicted, just getting a basic understanding of the neuroscience was so clarifying. It was like, oh, that's why I do that. And as we go through this, you're going to have a bunch of moments like, oh, that's why I feel that way, or that's why I respond that way. There's actually neuroscience behind it. Something's happening in your brain that's causing a lot of the behaviors. The reality is that if watching pornography had no consequence to your brain, if it didn't affect the circuits or the wiring, then actually you could watch pornography and it probably wouldn't affect your life. It's the changes to the brain that happen structurally that are so detrimental to not just the brain itself, but then the behavior that results. That's what makes pornography really addictive. So if we can understand what's going on in the brain, and then we can figure out how to reverse those effects or how to rewire the brain, then actually the behavior should follow suit as well. And that's when things get really fun. So we'll get there today, but why don't we start by talking a little bit about how the brain is affected by porn consumption. Now, there's 4 particular effects that we notice, and I'm going to kind of go in a particular order so that this makes the most sense. The first is a decreased stress response. Okay, so the more stress that you experience in life as you go on, I'm sure you've observed that your stresses in life increase, they don't decrease, right? And the way that the brain develops healthily is it actually adapts to the increase in stress, so that as you get more stress in life, your brain becomes better at dealing with stress, managing stress, processing stress, etc. When you watch pornography, your ability to cope with stress and also your brain's ability to adapt with increases in stress is severely impaired. And this is why people who watch pornography often stagnate in their maturation, either emotionally, spiritually, or sometimes in their career. They get stuck because their brain literally is not able to enhance or enlarge its capacity. It gets stuck and it gets plateaued. And that's because pornography is rewiring the brain to become stress averse, to become less resilient, and really to pursue immediate gratification. All of these things that are happening on a neurological level ultimately result in you being less able to cope with stress. So that's actually pretty devastating. You know, if you think about it, like, we're grown men here trying to grow, trying to advance, trying to become better leaders for our families, trying to become more effective and productive at work. This is detrimental, because if we cannot adapt and continue to respond well to stress, then we end up plateauing, and then we get really frustrated that we're not moving forward in life and we can't figure out why, and it seems like we're trying harder, but really it's like spinning your tires in the mud. You can press on the gas all you want, the car's not going to go anywhere as long as you're stuck in the mud. The second impact this has on the brain is reduced prefrontal cortex activity. Okay? So the best way I can explain it is this. If you were to look at the brain, okay, you would see that there's a small piece at the back. We call that the hindbrain or the brain stem. There's a larger structure in the middle, which is the midbrain, or the mammalian brain. So all mammals kind of have similar structures. And then at the very front, where your forehead is the prefrontal cortex. It's sort of this rounded shape. And this part of the brain is what separates us from all the other animals. So this is what makes us human. This is what allows us to think, to strategize, to forecast, and have foresight. Everything that makes us unique about humans is because of this structure. Okay? In the process of blood circulation, if you were to ever study the body, you would observe that the most important things are in the middle, right? Your heart is in the middle, and the further away you go from your heart, the less vital those organs become. So if you were stuck out in a snowstorm, you know, I'm based in Canada, so this is maybe more plausible for me than it is for you, depending on where you live. But if you got stuck out in a snowstorm for a really long time, eventually the circulation would reduce, and it would first reduce to your extremities, your fingers and your toes, because they're the least vital, okay? This concept occurs at a micro level as well. So if we were to pick any particular organ, if you looked at where the blood flow starts and where it ends, it always starts with the parts that are, generally it starts with the parts that are the most important. So with the brain, your blood circulation starts at your brainstem because your brainstem controls your breathing, your heart rate, and basically all of the survival mechanisms. That's why when you go into like fight or flight, it's high activity here because that's involved in your survival mechanisms. Okay? The next part of your brain, your mammalian brain, I guess is the next most important, you could argue, because it's responsible for functions that allow you to, move your body and perceive, visual stimulation, audible stimulation, all that stuff. Your prefrontal cortex is sort of the first thing to go when your brain gets to any kind of distress state because it technically is the least essential for survival, okay? Not to have a great, healthy, successful life, but just to survive. So, when you watch pornography, you get reduced activity here because your brain gets into a de-stress state and it decides, you know what, we don't need that as much as we need everything else. Porn is actually a stressor on your brain and your body, no matter how relaxing it might feel in the moment. So this reduced prefrontal cortex activity makes you dumber. I wish there was a better way to say it, but honestly, people begin to do stupid things when they watch more and more pornography. They become less long-term minded, they can't make good decisions, they show up in their relationships really poorly, and they don't realize how their behavior is having long-term consequences. Their overall capacity for what we would consider to be standard human functions declines as a result, and their overall quality of life declines as a result because they make short-term decisions, their relationships suffer, etc., etc. Okay, these are sort of the more human day-to-day detriments of watching pornography. Okay, you get a reduced stress response and reduced prefrontal cortex activity. The next two are really interesting because this starts to explain why we watch certain things and why temptations and triggers can become so difficult. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sensitization. All right. Sensitization is when there are normal things that are just ordinary that trigger you. So a different example, I'll use something in parallel. Let's say that you were addicted to cocaine and you always snorted cocaine through a dollar bill. Okay, so you'd roll it up, you stick one of the bill in your nose, the other one you do the line. Well, anytime that you see a rolled up dollar bill, maybe somebody just keeps all their money in their pocket and they roll it up, and one day they're paying for a meal, you're just out for dinner, and they pull out the roll of bills, that craving is going to be instigated because you saw something that your brain has been sensitized to. So when you watch pornography, it's the very same thing. For me, when I used to view pornography, there were specific actresses that I used to watch a lot of their content. So then I would see somebody and they would remind me of that actress and I get triggered. Not because they're doing anything provocative or sexual, it's just that there's a sensitization there. My brain has become sensitive to anything that reminds me of pornography, specifically the things that I am consuming in pornography. So this is why sometimes you get triggered out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere. Actually, there is an explanation, and your brain is in that sensitized state because pornography is so rewarding, and so the brain remembers it. It remembers that felt good, I enjoyed that, I want to do more of it. Let's get more sensitive and let's get more opportunistic about things that remind me of pornography. And that's why you get triggered more often, you get tempted more often. When they come, they're very intense. Your brain is trying to seek the first clues or the first indicators that it can get that dopamine hit. Okay, now in a few minutes, I'm going to show you how to rewire your brains from all the stuff that we're going to talk about. But I will say the sensitization, this is the part that is maybe the hardest. And that's because your brain is so reward driven that the sensitivity can stay there for a long time. I'll be honest, I've been clean for over 8 years now, and sometimes I still deal with some lingering effects of this. Now, the good thing is because I've rewired my brain, it doesn't really matter. Even if I do get a little bit more triggered by things, I know how to dissipate them, resolve them. We're going to talk about all that in a few minutes. Let's talk about the fourth effect this has on your brain first, okay? So far we've done the reduced stress response, low prefrontal cortex activity. We've talked about sensitization. And the fourth area, or the fourth detriment to your brain, is desensitization, okay? So kind of the opposite of sensitization. Sensitization is we're super, reactive. We're very, sensitive to cues that lead us to pornography. Desensitization is the inverse of this. So how many of you, if you look at when you first started watching pornography, how many of you would say that since you started watching to the kind of stuff that you've watched more recently, they've escalated? How many of you would say that's true? Probably all of you, right? Exactly. So the point here is when you start to watch the same things over and over again, your brain is very adaptable, okay? This is the same thing that's going on. Have you ever been in a room and you can just tell that somebody let one rip and like it smells awful, but then after a couple of minutes you don't notice it? And so we kind of think like, oh, I guess it must have dissolved or something, like it, just miraculously dissolved into the atmosphere. Until somebody comes into the room for the first time and they go, oh, what's that smell? Well, you got desensitized to the smell. It was there, but your brain got used to it. So it was no longer registering in its brain anymore. But that person who just entered in, that stench is brand new to them, and their brain is very aware of the change. Something changed, there's something different, and it smells really bad. When you watch pornography, a similar dynamic takes place. Your brain gets used to what you are viewing. And so eventually those things aren't as interesting. So then you start to click around at recommended videos, or you start to search for something else. I heard so-and-so talk about this genre or this specific video, and gradually things start to escalate because novelty enhances pleasure. So we've had a lot of clients come to us over the years, some of you would be in this category, where you're watching gay pornography or you're watching some sort of more niche content of pornography that you never thought you'd watch. You're heterosexual, you're in a heterosexual relationship, but you're watching this really obscure content. And the reason for that is it's not that necessarily this is a reflection of your orientation. This is a reflection of your brain wanting novelty, your brain wanting something new, wanting something different. And it doesn't always have to be things that we inherently think are pleasurable. Just the fact that it's new is pleasurable in of itself. But we don't get there overnight. It is a gradual escalation, and eventually you find yourself in these very obscure places. So number one, the thing I want you to get is that your brain does get desensitized, and eventually stuff on the screen isn't always enough. And so, a lot of clients come to us because they hired a hooker for the first time and they never thought they would do that. Or they had an affair and they never thought they would do that. We share online a lot that talk about this on Instagram all the time. Ted Bundy's a great example of this. Like the world's most notorious serial killer, he says a lot of his stuff started with pornography, and eventually the thrill of porn on media, the internet wasn't around back then, but VHS and magazines and whatever wasn't enough. So he sought in-person experiences that would be as thrilling. So the point here is things start to escalate, okay? And nobody is exempt from this because everybody has a brain and everyone's brains work the same way. But the second thing I want you to hear is that if you do find yourself watching content that maybe is a little bit out there or something that you're really ashamed of, it's actually part of the process. It's a reflection of your brain, not a reflection of you as a person. And I don't know about you, but I know for me that was really liberating. That was really de-shaming. Like, okay, I guess I'm not as fundamentally flawed as I thought. And that kind of leads into the next part of this, which is the most exciting part, which is that if you rewire your brain, you can reverse all these effects. And you can actually step into that healthy, regulated, high-functioning brain that you've always wanted. So there's a couple things that we need to talk about to rewire your brain. And again, we'll do another session at some point, and we'll go into much greater depth just on this part. But I want to give you a couple overarching concepts that are really going to help you in the rewiring process. Okay, so the first thing that we want to talk about when it comes to rewiring your brain is we want to eliminate the stimulation. So simply put, you gotta stop watching pornography. Now, obviously that's kind of a given, But let me just talk about a couple things that really set your brain up for success. So we know from the data that people watch most pornography on their phones, and they watch most commonly from 10 o'clock at night to midnight. Now, you might have different viewing patterns or different viewing habits, but what I would encourage you to do is start to put some barriers around this. You have to do everything you can to reduce the intake of pornography. Otherwise, it's going to be almost impossible to quit, and it's going to be very difficult for your brain to rewire. So the first challenge that we would give you guys is to go 21 days. Now, what happens in the first 21 days is that your brain fights very hard to get the stimulation. So these are not an easy 21 days. Usually the first 21 days are very difficult. The sensitivity jacks right up. Your brain is trying to get every little cue it can to get that hit. It wants the release. It wants the pleasure. It wants the dopamine. So that's the first thing. The other thing that's going to happen is you might even find that your dreams start to become really sexual because your brain is trying to find every single way that it can get that release. Now, if you can survive the first 21 days, your brain is going to flatline. So this is where your brain kind of gets a little confused because it can tell that something's changing, it's not getting the stimulation, and so the brain gets the signal, I need to adapt. Something has to give. But it doesn't know what it needs to adapt to. And this is why when you take a roots-based approach to recovery, this is where you can give it the right things to look towards, getting your needs met in healthy ways, taking care of yourself, greater self-awareness, the belief systems, all of those things start to really come into play here. And we give your brain something to orient around as it begins to rewire. So that's kind of the first timeline, is those 21 days. And then this period is probably another 60 days, I would say, where you're properly getting your brain oriented around more healthy patterns and concepts, okay? So the general principle here, the general theme is we have to quit pornography because we need to force our brain to rewire, and then we want it to rewire and orient around really healthy concepts. The more roots-based approach, which is what I'm talking to you guys about all the time. That's what's in my book. That's what we talk about online. That's what we talk about on the podcast. It's all there. Okay, there's a lot more to the rewiring process, but what I want to give you guys in just the couple of minutes left here is something that I wish I would have learned a long time ago. Now, I actually had to follow, when I was really studying this stuff, I was following clinical psychologists, I was following therapists, and I was following psychiatrists. In fact, some of the content that I followed was enough to get continuing medical education. In other words, if I was a doctor, this would have counted as like credits towards more education. That's how kind of advanced some of this stuff was. And that's where I learned this absolute gem that I'm really excited to share with you, okay? It's very simple, but if you understand this, this will revolutionize your entire recovery experience, okay? A brain circuit can only change when it is active. Okay, a brain circuit can only change when it is active. So I want you to think about this, all right? You have this system that is currently active. Not active in this moment, but it exists in your brain. The system is you get tempted or triggered, you gradually move more towards that temptation, you quit, you watch pornography, and then you have some sort of response after. Maybe it's shame, guilt, anger, sadness, whatever it might be. Okay? That circuit is inactive right now because right now in this moment, you're not gravitating towards watching pornography. In fact, because you're here, you're actually gravitating away from it. So when we intake knowledge, we load the gun. Okay, knowledge is bullets in a gun, it's ammunition. But until the circuit is active, nothing changes in your brain. So in other words, getting this content and spending this time with me, this is not what rewires your brain. This prepares you to rewire your brain. But the next time you're triggered and you're tempted, that's when you need to start executing what we've been talking about and what you've been learning with us, because that's when your brain circuits can actually change because they're active. If they're inactive, when they're dormant, your brain can't actually rewire. So that's why, one of the greatest lies of our society today is that knowledge is power. Knowledge is the potential. Knowledge is the bullets in the gun. But we have to be in those moments where we pull the trigger, where we take action. That's when your brain starts to rewire. That's why, when one of you comes to us and you say, I started watching, or I went down the normal path, my normal routine where I relapse, And halfway through, right as I opened the screen, right as I clicked on the video, 10 minutes into the video or a minute into the video, I realized, what am I doing? I don't want to do this. And I shut it down. We love those moments because that means the circuit was active, you did something different, you interrupted that circuit, and you created a new neural pathway in your brain. And this right here is how you rewire. So this is not an excuse to go get triggered and tempted, okay? Those situations will come. Put in your work in the meantime, because again, if we can rewire the roots if we can shuffle the roots and build a new root system in the process, that's going to really serve us, and it's going to strengthen us in those moments of temptation to be able to apply what we've learned and actually rewire our brain. And that's where you actually get healthier. So that's why we don't want to resist temptation early on. We want the temptations to come, and then we want to have a new response, and that new response is going to rewire our brain. It creates new pathways, and it makes the old ones eventually die and decay. You know, for me, I've been clean for 8 years. I mean, there's another coach on our team, he's been clean for 13 years. Those old pornography viewing circuits are long gone. They're history. They're dead because it's been so long and the brain has rewired, it doesn't need them anymore. And the same can be true of you guys if you start to apply some of the stuff we've learned. But truthfully, if there's nothing else you get from this time together, understand that a circuit can only change when it's active. I'm telling you, that right there, that is your ticket to full freedom. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe. And if you really did enjoy this content, I know you're gonna enjoy this video. Make sure you check it out. I'll see you in the next one.